Maryland versus McCulloch, 17 U.S. 4 wheat, 316, 18, 19. What is federalism and why is it important? Federalism is the sharing of power between national and state governments. Federalism is one of the most important concepts in the U.S. Constitution. In America, the states existed first and they struggled to create a national government. How did this case come to be? All thanks to the founding fathers Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison. Hamilton supported the founding of a national bank to control finances. Jefferson and Madison opposed because they thought there was no authority in the Constitution. Congress chartered the first national bank in Philadelphia in 1791. What is the issue? The constitutional issue involved in this case is the dispersion of power between the state and the federal government. The creation of the Second Bank of the United States led to an issue because Maryland would not tax the bank. Congress was chartering the Second Bank of the United States in 1816. Who, when, and where? James McCulloch and Maryland were both involved in this case that was taking place in Baltimore, Maryland in 1819. Events leading up. The First Bank of the United States fell in 1811 with lack of congressional support and inflation in result to the War of 1812, causing Congress to establish a new national bank in 1816. The Second Bank of the United States helped control the unregulated issuance of currency by state banks. With the population opposing this authorization by Congress, Maryland imposed a tax on all banks not chartered by the state. McCulloch, the cashier of the U.S. Bank in Baltimore, Maryland, refused to pay taxes. In 1818, the state of Maryland passed legislation to impose taxes on the bank. The bank was the depository of federal funds. The bank agreed to loan the federal government money in a form of taxes. State banks failed in depression in 1818, blaming the bank for this. Maryland sued James McCulloch for this debt. James McCulloch stated the tax was unconstitutional. A state court ruled for Maryland, and the court was appealed affirm.
The Supreme Court unanimously ruled that the Bank of the United States was constitutional and that the Maryland tax was unconstitutional. Chief Justice John Marshall of the Supreme Court refuted the claim that the state of Maryland tried making that the Constitution was ratified by the state convention. Marshall declared that the Constitution was created from the people, not the states. The tax that Maryland tried to impose was violating this constitutional sovereignty because it was a tax against everyone of the nation by a state that only consisted of some people. The court also rejected the argument that the Constitution did not allow for a national bank. Marshall argued that the Constitution is just a framework. All the rules do not lie explicitly in the Constitution, however, it is meant to be interpreted. Under the necessary and proper clause, Congress is able to carry out enumerated powers, allowing them to create the bank. The immediate impact of the case was that the Second Bank of the United States was allowed to remain, showing that the Constitution was the supreme law of the land. Also, Maryland and other states were no longer able to tax the federal government. Long-term effects. Congress was able to demonstrate its implied powers given by the necessary and proper clause. This set an example for how the new enumerated powers could be used for future cases. It also showed how the federal government is superior to the state government. This court case upholds the idea that the sovereignty of the Constitution comes from the people and not the states.
What we think. It is important for Congress to have implied powers because it is necessary for a government to adapt to new cases that arise. However, it should be noted that these powers should have checks and balances or else they will be abused. Taking a stand for the people by establishing that they are above the state was also a critical point made in this case. Key points. First, Congress did have the authority to create a national bank. Second, Maryland could not tax the national government. And lastly, the federal state is superior to state authority.
Created using Powtoon.